Hey everybody, what's good? What's going on? JB here with another CyberInsight Network Plus Practical Lab video. Today's video is going to be covering a topic that was requested over the past week. We've kind of been moving through some routing stuff and some switching stuff. And I put the question out to folks both on Twitter and here on YouTube to see what they wanted to cover next. And resoundingly, the thing that the majority of folks picked was doing some subnetting exercises. So we are going to do that. I'm going to jump over onto my computer. I have a few different exercises that we're going to go through, some simple stuff, and then we're actually going to take a look at a layout of a relatively simple network architecture. And given a certain IP range, we're going to take it, break it up into different subnets so you can kind of see how we would go about actually operationalizing the subnetting skills that we're going to be covering. So before I jump over to the computer, if this is your first time watching any of these Network Plus Practical Labs, or your first time on the channel, please go ahead and smash that like, subscribe, and notification bell. So for those of you who are already subscribed and back watching these videos, I appreciate it. Love the support from all of you guys. So if you want to grab a pencil and paper, if you want to do this along with me, we're going to go hop into it, and yeah, we're going to have some fun. Hey everybody, so let's dive into this. As I mentioned before, this is going to be a practical lab on subnetting. We're not necessarily going to go through all the aspects of understanding binary, and this isn't necessarily a rudimentary lesson on subnetting. I do have some videos that actually break down how to subnet and supernet. I'll put some links for those up here, and definitely watch those first. What this is going to be doing is more so providing you with a little bit of some hands-on labs that you can do to practice and kind of give you some tools that will help you as you go through the process of subnetting. So this diagram here that I'm showing is one that I put together a while back to help people who are learning how to subnet. It kind of takes the idea of subnets and how they kind of fit together, how you take a larger subnet and you can break it up into different chunks. But all of those chunks have to follow along certain lines. There's certain mathematical reasons or mathematical boundaries that we have to fall within to take two smaller subnets and combine them together. So for the exercises that we're going to be doing today, we're pretty much going to be sticking with taking a /24 network and breaking that up into various types of groups. Because realistically, in an operational environment, that's going to be the type of stuff that you're going to run into the majority of the time. And it's a little bit easier to conceptualize, especially for new people, starting with a /24 and moving through that. When I talk about /24, that's just a shorthand way of saying 255, 255, 255.0. If you go back and watch some of my other videos, we talk about the differences between Class A networks, Class B networks, and Class C networks. Remember that the subnet mask is really determining which part of an IP address corresponds to the network portion and which part corresponds to the host portion. So that way when we look at a subnet, so for instance we're looking at that 255.255.255.0, what that's saying is that the first three octets of that IP address, 192.168.1, is a network range, and then that .0 is what's able to be used for the hosts. And as we take that and we break that up into smaller portions, as we go further and further down that diagram, you see that the amount of hosts that are able to fit in the subnets gets smaller and smaller and smaller, but we end up being able to create more and more networks for subnets. So that's a little bit confusing. It'll make a little bit more sense once we put it into action. So let's move on to our first practical lab exercise. Now, what I've done here is a little bit of a cheat sheet that will help us figure out subnets and the amount of hosts that are in different types of subnets. Now obviously you could use a subnet calculator if you wanted to, or once you do this enough, you're able to do this just in your head. And that's what I'm able to do, is I could just look at the IP address and the subnet mask, and I could tell you how many hosts would be in there, and the network address and the broadcast address. And that's kind of what that diagram that I showed you kind of represents, but you need to have some practice going over this, for a considerable period of time to where that becomes second nature. And a tool like this will help you out. So if we were to take an IP address of 192.168.2.0 with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.192, we want to find out how many hosts could we have within that subnet range. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the subnet, and we see that's a 192. So we're going to go to this first section here within the spreadsheet. Okay, so just follow me with this, and I'll kind of explain as we go through it. So we have a 192, and so what we're going to do is we are going to mark this down to 192. Since we marked this as 2 here, we're going to do the same thing starting from 128. So we're going to mark here and mark here. Now, right away, what this has done is this will show us that for a subnet that's .192, the amount of bits that are within that particular subnet is 64, which means 64 IP addresses. Okay, so what we're also going to do is, since we used and marked this twice under the subnets and under the bits, we're going to go down here to our powers of 2 section, and we're going to mark this as 2. What that does is that shows us that there is 4 subnets with 64 IP addresses in each of them that makes up a /24. You also notice up here at the top, when we did this out, we did the CIDR notation for it as well. So you'll see that a 192 address equals a /26 address. If we were to go back over to that diagram that I had, that will kind of show that to us. Let's go back here. You'll see here when we're talking about 26 and a 192, then you can kind of see that those correlate together. And that's because starting at 24, for every time we end up getting or making the subnet and breaking it up into smaller bits, we keep going to the, making the number a little bit larger, 25, 26, 27, all the way up until what would be a /32, which is just one individual host. So back within Excel, we marked the 2 here because we did 2 under the subnets and 2 under the bits. Now, since we're dealing with an 8-bit range available within that subnet mask, remember, so it was 255.255.255.0 is a /24, and we're trying to figure out stuff that's within that last octet. What we're going to do is go 8 minus 2 is going to give us 6. So we're going to put 6 in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And as I said, that is going to tell us that the host range is going to have 64 IP addresses, but you have to remember we have to subtract 2. 1 for the network address and 1 for the broadcast address. And again, if we go back to our handy diagram, we kind of covered that there. So we'll see that under this /26 area. So we see under this /26 area, you'll see that the network for the first subnet starts with a 0 and the broadcast ends with a 63. And that means that anything in between that, 1 through 62, is usable IP addresses for the hosts. So that's in essence saying what that spreadsheet was saying, which was 64 minus 2 for the amount of hosts that you have. Let's go back and do another example just so we can see. So let's go, let's make this a 240. Okay. And if we were to go back and look at our other diagram, we would know that the CIDR for a 240 would be 28. Get rid of these. Get rid of these. Get rid of these. Okay. So 240 subnet, 255, 255, 255.240 or /28. We want to find out how many hosts do we have within that subnet that we can use. So again, 240, we're going to go over to our subnet column, and we are going to go, oh, I should say, we're going to go back over to our bit column. So that's 240, so we're going to go down to 240. So that was 4, and we're going to do the same thing, 4. So what that tells us is that for the /28 or .240 subnet, each one of those subnets has 16 possible IP addresses available for it. Okay, now we're going to go down to our powers of 2, and remember, so we're going to go 4 because we did 4 up above. All right, so we go 8 minus these 4. It's going to give us 4 here. So then that equals 16. 16 minus 2 equals 14 usable IP addresses. We'll do one more just to make sure that it kind of really sticks. So let's go. Let's do a 128. Get rid of those, and get rid of these. Okay. So 128. If we were to go look at the diagram, we would know what the CIDR notation is for that. So know that a 128 is actually a /25. So we're just going to go at just 1, right? Because that is in the bit column is 128. And then in the subnet column, that's just 1. So that means that within each of the /25s, there's 128 IP addresses within each subnet. And since we only did 1x under subnets, we're going to go 1, which means that there's 2 /25 subnets that make up 1/24. And then we're going to go 8 minus the 1 that we did here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? So that's going to give us 128 IP addresses. And again, host minus 2. So that's going to give us 126 usable IP addresses in a /25 subnet. All right. So that is our first practical lab that we're going to do. And that was kind of useful for understanding the amount of IP addresses that are in each of the different types of subnets and giving you some tools to be able to figure that out so you can kind of do the math on your own to get to the point where you kind of just memorize these things. The next lab is going to be taking a particular host IP address and finding out which particular network subnet it falls within. We're going to use the same tools to help us out here. And then we just have a random IP address with a subnet mask and a CIDR notation for the subnet that it's within. And we want to know which subnet is the host in. First, we have to find out where the boundaries are for this particular subnet so we can kind of work our way through to figure out which IP address range it falls into. So let's go, this is going to be a 248. So under our bits column, we're going to go down and do that. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down to 248. So we're going to do the same thing under our subnet row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what that tells us is that for a .248 or /29, each of those subnets has 8 IP addresses in each of them. Okay. Now we're going to go down here and do the same thing under our powers of 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. And then so 8 minus 5 is going to leave us with 3. Right? And we already knew it was 8, so we're going to take 8 minus that 2, gives us 6 IP addresses that are usable for each subnet. Now, how are we going to go about finding out which particular subnet this falls in. Well, remember, it's going to start back at 172.16.100.0 is going to be the first subnet, and that's going to be a /29, and it's only going to have 8 IP addresses in it. So let's go back to our handy diagram that will kind of point us in the right direction here. So if we look at this, we see all the way at the bottom is where the /29s are. Okay. And it's so small that I don't actually have IP addresses numbered in here. But don't worry, we're going to do a little bit of fancy math using the /28s to figure out where these are. So if we look at the /28s, you see how each of those /28s holds 16 addresses, right? So the first one is 0 through 15. The next one after that is 16 through 31, and then 32 through 47, 48 through 63, and you can kind of see how they all kind of build on top of each other. Down and look at the next level down, which is the /29s, we see that that /0 box, which had 16 IP addresses in it, is broken up. It has 2 boxes in there, meaning that each of those boxes signifies 8 IP addresses, which is what we just talked about when we were looking at the Excel spreadsheet. A /29 has 8 IP addresses in each. So if we look at that first box and we know that it starts on 0, we can assume that that first box is 0 through 7. And then the next box next to that is 8 through 15. If we go down to the next box underneath that, it's going to be 16 through 23. And the next box after that is going to be 24 through 31. So you can kind of see how this math all works out as it continues to step through in these chunks of 8 IP addresses. So what we need to do is find out where the subnet that holds the host address of 118 resides. So if we look at the diagram here, we look at the /28s, we see that there is one subnet that starts at 112 and another /28 that starts at 128. So obviously what we're looking for 118 is going to be somewhere in this 112/28 block, right? But we aren't looking for a /28, we're looking for a /29. So if we were to take that 112 and realize that that range for the /28 is 112 through 127, and divide that in half, right? Because that's going to be going from 16 addresses down to 8 addresses. We'll see that we either have a subnet of 112, which is a /29, or the next available one after that is a .120/29. Well, a host with an IP address of 118 obviously is smaller than 120, so that means that it's going to fall into the 112 subnet. So if we go back here, then that is going to be in 172.16.100.112/29. And that is going to be our answer. So you can actually go through and plug in any type of numbers in here and do the same type of math to go through using the diagram and using this to kind of figure out where those things kind of fall. So let's just do another one real quick. Let's just go 72. And we'll make it a, I don't know. Let's go 240 address. Remember a 240 address. Let's correct this. 72. 240 address is a /28. And we don't know what that is yet. All right, let's do the quick math on this. We'll get rid of that. Get rid of that. All right, so not slash, so 172, and it's a .240 or /28. So we're gonna go 4 for 240 in the bits column in the subnet. in the subnet line, subnet row, we're going to go 4 over, so that's going to be 16. And again, 8 minus the 4 that we put there is going to be 16 minus 2 for 14 usable hosts. But we know that each /28 subnet equates to 16 IP addresses. Well, this one we could probably do in our head because it's a little bit easier. So the first subnet starts at 0 and goes up to 15. Okay, well, we know that it's not in there. The next subnet, that's a /28, goes from 16 up to 31. Right? Okay, it's not in there. The next subnet after that is 32 through 47. So all I'm doing is I'm just taking 16 IP addresses and adding them in blocks on top of each other in my head. So that got up to 47. The next block after that is 48 through 63, right? And then the next block after that is going to be 64 through 79. Well, 64 through 79 is where 72 would fit in. So it is 172, 16, 100.64/28. So that's kind of how you go through and kind of, work through those different blocks. Once you understand where the lines of delineation are on those different subnetting blocks, then it's a lot easier to be able to do that math in your head. All right, now for the really fun part is we are going to design a network.